Hello and welcome to the AdTech Heroes podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about complexity within our industry, and I'm delighted to be joined by Clare Ritchie. Clare is the SVP, Global Head of Programmatic and Inhousing at Omnicom Media Group. Before this role, she was a Global Head of Programmatic at Mediacom and had previous stints at Dentsu and Xaxis. Hi Clare, how's it going?
Good, thank you very much. How are you?
Very well, thank you, very well. To kickstart, it'd be great to understand a little bit about your career and what's got you to where we are today.
I was really lucky to join the advertising industry at a time when the move to digital for publishers was just starting to hold some weight. They were kind of just starting to explore the monetization of their online properties. Contextual relevance, associated messages was really new and exciting. And I absolutely jumped at the chance to move into it, unlike a lot of my colleagues at the time who were slightly more wary. I worked with some really brilliant people across different areas of the industry. Mainly, I've been in agency operating or holding companies in the programmatic and digital space. My first job was selling classified print ads, so the open marketplace of the publishing world. And like I said, it wasn't long before I stuck my hand up and moved into online. I worked hard, but had lots of good opportunities up through organisations, planning, evangelising programmatic as it's become more mainstream, I suppose. Working both in markets and across regions. And like you say, I've recently moved to Omnicom, where I'm two-hatted, focusing not just on programmatic, but also looking at the wonderful world of Inhousing now.
Brilliant. And do they go hand in hand, would you say, Inhousing and programmatic? Or would you say it's just, there was a role needed for each of them and Omnicom decided to just cluster them together and give it to you because of how amazing you are? Was that the reason, or would you say it's they do go in hand in hand?
I think there's a role for each of them, but there are a lot of interrelations, especially from programmatic out to in-housing, and mainly because my view, and as people who know me know, I don't feel like programmatic is in fact a channel. It is a way of buying media. Mm-hmm. That way of buying media and a lot of the principles behind it apply to multiple different medias, and especially across all of biddable. Anyway, when we're looking at search and social as well. So I think there's a lot of synergy in terms of our general approach to the programmatic landscape, its evolution, its regulations, et cetera, that are applicable across the board. And in-housing specifically, I think it warrants its own nod. It's something that clients have a right to understand how they can manage various bits of their own business. And I think it's something that agencies have been in the past a little bit nervous of. If a client's come to them and said, I'd like to in-house my strategy for this, it's been a concern as to, I suppose, relinquishing the reins and giving over some of that control back to the client, and how they then fit into it. What's their role? How do they add the value that they are there to do? And I absolutely believe that there are multiple ways that we can add value. And one of the best ways that we can do that is by creating a flexible model around each of our clients, because no two are the same, that supports the opportunities that they have to do things on their side, the information that we have collectively, the team that we can build around it, and the expertise that we can then add in as an agency group. So yes, interlinked, but warrant their own airtime. Certainly.
Definitely. And I think in-housing as a topic has been obviously around for some time, right?
Yeah,
I remember less so now in terms of the panels and industries. You might, out of, 10 or 15 topics or panels, have one or two in-housing. But yes. I remember maybe 7-8 years ago, it was literally 50% of the panels were about in-housing. Yeah. And I think maybe the industry got a little, maybe scared's a strong word, but was kind of rushing around. Agency people were figuring out how that affects them. And obviously the biggest impact is to agencies, right? And then the media owners and the publishers were thinking, okay, well, do we need to go direct to the client now? But we don't want it to, bypass the agency and mess that relationship up, which, the agencies have been doing amazing jobs, all this time. So would you say that still exists, that focal point of in-housing and it exists like it was 7-8 years ago? Has it changed? It'd be good to kind of get your take on that.
I think it's changed. I don't think it feels like the big red panic button anymore, or the thing that people are nervous to hear about because they don't quite know how to approach it. I think in-housing, it's not black and white. It's not really clear cut. It means so many different things to so many different people. And I think actually the acceptance of the fact that when a client is looking to manage an element of their operations themselves, it doesn't mean that there's no role for everyone else around it. It's an exploration, it's an understanding, it's a investigation into actually, okay, so what does this mean? And let's have the conversation about, okay, absolutely brilliant. Take your social strategy in-house and your social buying, but how do we create the construct around that for you so that you have the ability to still get the best rates? And how do you still kind of keep up your kind of publisher relationships? And how does billing work on the back of that? It's always a big one. So I think the conversation still very much exists. It's not the kind of hot, scary, to for want again of a better word, topic that potentially it once was, but it's an understanding in a kind of age of real flexibility, data, and hopefully more transparency than we've had previously, of exploring what's going to work for you as a business and what's going to give you greater insight and efficiency by being with an in-house team or an externally sourced team in whatever shape or way that might be. That's the interesting bit. It's kind of delving into those details and figuring out something that's really fit for purpose, and not just necessarily an off-the-shelf model to, well, you take that and we'll do this. And never the twain shall meet. Right?
And who decides that? It's always been interesting from my perspective, always been on the media owner side. Who decides how hands-on the client is, how versus the agency? And you said it does differ from client to client, but is that kind of enforced by them or the agency saying, okay, well, let's look at what you've got and then really deep dive into that and really start picking at certain elements which they probably can't do or they can do. How would you navigate around that? What, and who pushes each scenario?
I think the best examples are where there is real openness and understanding of both sides of the businesses in terms of the capabilities and the approach from an agency or a supplier point of view, and the real business needs and business outcomes design and setup and principles and ethos of the business that you happen to be working with from a client perspective. And I think the examples that I see that work really, really well are where you almost have one team. Yes, okay, someone might have a @agency.com email address and someone might have an @client.com email address, but they have an interlinked team and there are no real bounds between that. And I think it's, ultimately a client has every say on what happens with their business and how they choose to work. And it's always going to be their decision at the end of the day. An agency would never be in a position to turn around and say, well, you will work this way. An agency's job is to advise. An agency's job is to bring all relevant, up-to-date material possible to the table so that the client can make an informed decision. And I think if we can get to the state where a client can look at everything in front of them and go, right, this is the right path for me. It might be the right testing path. There might have to be kind of iterations of it down the road. But if they're in a position where they can confidently say, I know this is the right decision for me to have a go in this direction, this is what it means, this is what it costs, this is what the perceived benefits will be, then we've done our job as an agency or an industry very well.
Amazing. So you've been in your role for a few months now, right? Since 2 months?
Not many.
Not many. It'd be great to understand what a typical day looks like for you. And has it been different to previous roles, especially your latest role at MediaCom?
Yeah. It's different every day of the week, which is what I love about it. My week starts with very structured meetings, business updates, what's going on, both from a team sense and a leadership sense. I spend a couple of days in the office in London, which is great, and I try and prioritize a lot more of the face-to-face time, one-to-ones. Had a brilliant session with my Programmatic team yesterday, talking about the industry, where we're going on a couple of the key projects we want to activate on this year, which are things that we can absolutely do over Teams and Zoom, etc., etc. But it was really nice, kind of sat around a table with a coffee and a piece of paper. Love a piece of paper. Not great for the planet, but really nice to actually just scribble something down and have something tactile that you can feel every now and again. And then back end of the week, I do try and make sure there's a little bit of time to actually activate or do some of the things that we've been talking about during the week, but lots of meetings, certainly. My conversations are generally very broad, or certainly with a broad range of people, especially having two hats on.
Yeah.
So they could be internal client leads, platform partnerships, industry bodies, and every conversation brings something new, which is one of the things I really love about the industry. You never quite know where you're going to get to with a conversation or what you're going to get. At this time of the year, though, we're doing lots of planning, lots of thinking about what this year looks like, what we'd like to be able to deliver for our clients, and how to make our offerings and our capabilities stronger and stronger over the course of the year.
Brilliant. So not a quiet January, safe to say then.
No, not in any way, shape or form, although I wouldn't have it any other way. So.
Brilliant. So our topic today, we wanted to talk about complexity and how that is within our industry. And obviously we can take it in so many different directions, right?
Yeah.
But to literally just, kickstart, how complex would you say our industry is? And you can put it with any lens that you would like.
Very. Our industry is multidimensional, fast-paced, and it's continually evolving. And I think a byproduct of persistent innovation means that the ecosystem is complex by nature. We have new technologies, products, platforms emerging all the time, which in itself gives a feel of complexity, because just when you feel like you know what's going on, there's something new to add to it. There's a different piece of the jigsaw that needs to be slotted in and understood, kind of the interplay between everything. I think our responsibility to clients is ultimately helping them evaluate those opportunities available to them. As an advertiser, irrespective of platform, opportunity, etc., you need to be able to feel confident in what's going on. And it is, from the outside in, even being shown a Lumascape, it can be a little bit daunting when you first look at it. So if we can help clients understand products, any product that is relevant to them, the associated risks, the benefits, the performance, the success, and how that can then be used to iterate and drive going forwards, that will ultimately create a level of understanding. And I think each of those things has their own complexity, and we shouldn't be looking for shortcuts around them. I think that's a really dangerous approach. I think the time to understand and get to know the right opportunities for each situation, with help, with constructs around it, that clarity and understanding should simplify the complex and ultimately build a lot of trust and transparency through the industry.
You mentioned there's always new innovations, new technologies. You've worked hard through probably one product in 1 year, and then it could completely change, right? The year after, or some new regulation can come into place, or a new technology comes into place to block it, or whatever, right? But how would you keep on top of the latest innovations and technologies? Is it through talk to people? Was there any specific online material you would read? It'd be great to understand that.
I use my industry publication updates. I always have a quick skim through and try and read a couple of good articles as often as possible. I think a huge amount of the information, though, that I bring together comes from the relationships that I have in the industry. So spending time not only with our partners and our suppliers, but also our clients as well, because there is such a breadth in the industry. And I think you've got to understand at any given moment how to hone in on the information that you need. I love doing industry panels because you end up having a topic, and it means you've actually got to focus your attention into a specific area for once, rather than being directed in lots and lots of different directions. So I think understanding the questions and the needs that are coming through is a really, really valuable way of pinpointing what the relevant bits of information are that you actually need at any one time. That said, keeping a broad eye on interesting new technologies that have popped up Acquisitions is always an interesting one. It's kind of predicting the future, what's going on, and relationships. A meandering chat is always going to give you much more information than trying to talk through a 10-slide deck on a specific product.
Definitely, and it's interesting you mentioned the acquisition part, because in the last couple of years in AdTech, right, we've seen a lot of consolidation and mergers and acquisitions, and obviously CTAG, we've been part of a few of them in the last couple of years. I think we'll probably see more of that, in my opinion, in 2023. And maybe that's part of the solution for the complexity within our industry is, well, if there's player A, B, and C doing very similar things, I know this is very simple. Why don't they all kind of come together and build an amazing product ultimately for the client? So I think we'll see a lot more of that. I think we'll see a lot more of I don't know, maybe like value chain and ad tech, maybe due to the death of the cookie and there's less reliance on third parties. I think everyone has to prove their status in the chain and why they're there and what's the value that they're adding for agencies and brands. And have you seen that as well? Have you seen that kind of shift to maybe, I don't know, on your media plans or your team's media plans, getting smaller and smaller, or is it still quite vast? I don't know whether you get to see that on a day to day, but is it still like 10, 15 media owners per plan?
I think, again, it differs by client, and I think it partly differs depending on programmatic maturity. I think we almost see a bit of a bow tie effect of, it's almost a reverse bow tie effect, I suppose, in terms of entering programmatic and maybe choosing a few kind of premium PMPs to just test the water and just start to understand what programmatic can achieve. There's then this expansion into, hang on a minute, we're getting performance here. Let's try a bit of this. Let's try a bit of this, which then ultimately over time is honed into a better, more consistent long-term strategy where, yes, on our more programmatically mature clients, I would expect to see less lines on a media plan, although I would always hope that there is still room for testing and innovation. And I would advise anyone to not get too stuck in their ways, because we change all the time. And I think one of the reasons we've got so many little bits of companies in the industry is because technology is very accessible. And we all have different ideas and different ways that we can think of using it. It's one of the exciting parts of what we do. We get to talk to our partners and we get to develop new opportunities that are going to create new ways of working or competitive advantage or our own kind of bespoke approach to how we solve for problems. And everyone's looking at these things. So lots of different companies that do similar-ish kind of things have cropped up. The acquisitions then come because a slightly more broad-ranging or focused company or developed or mature company goes, actually, that would be quite interesting. That's going to really supplement my skill set. And instead of developing that for themselves, the acquisition of a ready-to-go product is always going to drive them further and faster in a position that they can. So I think I think we will see more. I think there is an obvious kind of benefit from consolidation in many senses. And part of that is securing your place in the market and not being too niche and being able to answer to many questions, and then ultimately have the support and the capital around you to be able to continue to develop and grow further. And this year we know there's going to be continued economic pressure. So it will be very interesting to compare 1st of January to the 31st of December this year, I think, what that looks like.
Would you say then there's maybe less test budgets because it's kind of going to tried and tested this year? Or do you think there'll always be a certain element of test budgets for new entrants within our industry?
I hope there will always be an element of test budgets. I think a lot of the interesting things that come out of this industry are new, and they are developed in answer to challenges or regulation changes or transparency or cookie deprecation. So I think ultimately, if we are not making room for testing and understanding new capabilities, better capabilities, enhanced capabilities, they don't necessarily have to be a brand new thing, but a tweak on something that was being done previously. If we don't make room for that on the media plan, we're potentially selling ourselves short. So not for every single campaign, not for every single part of a kind of brand or product, but it's always worth looking at how you can learn and explore and get a little bit more insight into actually how you can best connect with your audience and how you can then drive that resultant performance, which is ultimately why you're running your media campaign in the first place.
You've mentioned obviously complexity in our industry, but your role now, as well as previously, has been a global role. Does that, in essence, bring complexity as well? You know, having this global role, having this kind of like step back approach and looking at different regions. It's good to understand those complexities a little bit as well.
Yeah, it absolutely adds a layer of complexity, and actually, anyone in a global role will always face the challenge of how to get close enough to everything that's going on. Do you operate at a regional level? Knowing, however, that especially in kind of regions like APAC and especially the EU, there is huge differences between markets, both in terms of a maturity sense, data availability, legislation. How do you retain that kind of currency of knowledge? And I think for me, one of the really interesting things is that actually globally, we are fueled by what's happening in the markets that are being pushed the hardest. So thinking about, for example, I don't know, when we first encountered GDPR.
I'm not sure I understand.
Siri doesn't understand. Have you heard that?
There you go. Right on cue.
Absolutely. So thinking about GDPR, when we first encountered that, we then started, as we were designing for solutions for the future, we would always have that in our mind. And anything that we were creating then that was globally consistent would always have that floor slightly raised by that push to do something in a slightly different way or a slightly better way. So actually, often we were in a very lucky position that we were slightly ahead of the curve when that kind of regulation pushed out into broader markets. We already had either constructs or approaches in place, or actually in some cases we were already operating in that way anyway. So I think there's a real benefit to having global input, oversight. Really, really lucky. Omnicom has an absolutely phenomenal programmatic community, incredibly vocal, sharing information and content all the time, and it's a real kind of pleasure to be a part of that and see the different things that are coming through. And I think for me, it's about making sure we're always listening in the same way that as you move through your career and further away from that day-to-day activation, you always need to have one ear on the ground or a way of getting back close to activation to make sure that these considerations that you're making from a product sense are actually going to ring true when it comes to someone who's hands on keyboards in a platform. It makes sense for them. The same has to be said as we look globally and regionally, that the problems that we're solving for are the problems that our markets need help with. And the navigation of that, yes, absolutely can be complex, certainly.
Yeah, I've seen that on the media owner side, working in global roles. You know, you really have to go in and spend some time with each team and really understand what their concerns are or the opportunities for each market, because it's hard to kind of have a blanket approach, but then you obviously still want to have some standardized procedures and rules of work. So yeah, I think it's just navigating that. It's complex, like what we're talking about. So I don't think it'll get any easier, but the key here is just talking, right? And like you said, getting a paper and drawing down. You know, it doesn't have to be a paper; it could be a whiteboard, could be anything else. So I think that's definitely important. Do you think because it's quite a complex industry, it's damaging people entering the industry? So talking about kind of whether it's students or whether it's people shifting industries and coming into our media industry. What I've seen is a lot of people leaving our industry, to be completely honest. I don't know whether it's surprising or not surprising, but a lot of them have gone into kind of like yoga instructors and looking at health and fitness, which is, maybe we need to have some kind of industry study around this. Is there specific reasons for that shift of industry? But when it comes to entering our industry, do you think the complexity is damaging it?
I hope not. From the outside in, I suspect researching broadly into the advertising industry can be incredibly daunting. Mm-hmm. Although that should be true from the outside in for most industries, short of, having a vocation to follow and understanding a real kind of passion for something very known and with a great awareness around it. The breadth and the variety, however, is what gives us the opportunity. And the kind of adaptations and applications of technology are what drives us further. Advertising is rarely, or certainly the technical capabilities in advertising are rarely going to be something that, as a 5-year-old, if asked what you want to be when you grow up, you are going to parrot. It is not a doctor or a nurse or an astronaut or fire engine driver. It's not known. And I think, there is lots of really good companies in our industry doing lots of work with engineering universities, kind of about that, the awareness on that perspective of the applications of technology. That doesn't then apply to someone actually hands on keyboards, running a campaign or media planning. And I think, in the same way that we need to create clarity for our clients, we do need to help navigate this for people coming into the industry. And part of any interview process should be the opportunity to provide a layer of education, provide a bit of an understanding about not only the company, but the company's role within the industry. I mean, some of the big, interesting things that are happening. And to be able to answer any questions that people have. I think more junior in our careers, we often forget that an interview should be an opportunity for us to ask questions to an employer, as well as answer the questions an employer has for us. It's 50-50. You have to be able to make a decision at the end of the day if this is something that's right for you. But I would be very interested to know if there's any research out there that says that people are actively not approaching our industry or joining the industry for a specific reason. And if that is in fact complexity, I suspect it would be more likely that it's the unknown or the unthought of. But I'd be really interested to see.
And hopefully that's improving. I know when I joined the industry about 12, 13 years ago, it was pretty much by chance. We just finished the kind of recession in 2008, 2009. And it was kind of everyone was just applying for jobs and kind of a lot of us, I think, that joined around that time just happened to get into advertising. Obviously,
needed
it's been amazing. Needed a job, right? And now I think there are probably more resources out there to understand our industry. And like you said, probably not deep diving under the hood into the SSPs, the DSPs, and that kind of thing. But I think even universities are starting to teach more on digital. And I remember our digital kind of module within A levels of business. It was very, very basic. If you think about it now. So I think that is definitely improving.
I think it's improving, and I think the way that schools are talking to kids as they're making the decision between university or a first job is very, very different as well. I do some sixth form mentoring at the school that I actually used to go to. It's brilliant because you sit in the careers department and it used to be just a row of university prospectuses and then maybe one or two other little bits of kind of information. It's now incredibly diverse in terms of how you can go on from school in terms of what opportunities there are available to you and kind of what soft skills that you need as well. They do an awful lot around actually it's really important for you to go and learn how to either present or use Excel, or which most of them obviously now do anyway, or kind of have confidence in public speaking and things like that, which that wasn't the case for me when I left school. It was fill in your UCAS form and off to university you will go. So I hope that not just for advertising, but that's changing at all levels, that kind of awareness of opportunity and breadth of kind of how to use your skills, how to use your interests, and not necessarily in the most traditionally linear way.
Yeah, definitely. And what would your advice be for succeeding in the industry? So people that have actually joined, whether it's 6 months in, a year into, 5 years in, what's your advice on that? And what skills do you think that they would need to succeed?
I think there's a home for most people in our industry because, one of the things I really enjoy about it is the real diversity of people and opinion and thought. There's such a variety of roles and skills needed to fill them. But I think that said, wherever you are in our industry, there's a few things that that are valuable. I think you need to be adaptable, or at least be willing to embrace adaptation. We are an industry of change. So being open to new opportunities, being willing to kind of adapt around the flux and the changes in a kind of last minute change of direction. Building relationships. You never know who you're going to come into contact again. Always be your best self and build strong relationships, and not just within the industry, with clients as well, colleagues, and be vulnerable. I think especially programmatically, get comfy with what you don't know. It's okay to say that you don't know the answer to a question. I don't think there's anybody who would hold it against you, especially with such a kind of broad remit. Think about what you do need to know. Focus your learning on the things that are going to support you on a day-to-day, and hopefully paint a picture around it in your spare time, and enjoy learning and putting the pieces of the puzzle together to make a really good picture.
Definitely. I think you mentioned don't burn your bridges. I think we've all seen in our industry people have burnt their bridges, and it's unfortunate, right? Because whether it's client to agency to publisher, it's always good to kind of keep that peace. I feel, and who knows, right? Anything can happen. It's such a small industry in that sense. Everyone pretty much knows everyone.
Absolutely.
So and just for kind of yourself, really, you shouldn't really, you've got to think of it. It's business, it's work. So I think
it is.
While we are trying to navigate our way through life, and whether it's families, career, if there's a decision that's made at work, it's a decision that's made for work, right? And hopefully it's not due to personal reasons. So I think a lot of us do take some things probably a bit too hard, and need to think of it as a business, right? It needs to be, these are business, and we need outcomes, and unfortunately all businesses don't succeed. So there are tough decisions to be made. So I think that's important to understand as well.
Yeah. Thick skin.
Exactly. Keep thick skin. Yeah. Would you say in our industry we're demanding a lot from people? Within our industry.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because we do work in a often fast-paced, mostly time-sensitive environment, which feels like a demand on time, a demand on capacity and capability. I don't feel like we sugarcoat that too much, especially not for people entering the industry. I don't feel like we portray a picture, an unrealistic picture. I think we're quite realistic about the demands, for want of a better word, of work. We this is an interesting one from a global perspective as well, because if you work 9 to 5 in a single market, everyone else is working 9 to 5 in that market. There will be some variations around the theme. People will be working flexi hours. There'll be the odd thing that kind of crosses the borders of your hours. If you're in a global role, your 9 to 5 is not the same 9 to 5 as it is in Australia or San Francisco or anywhere else in the world. So actually there's a need to understand the demand that is made on you and create your own level of normal around that. There's always going to be deadlines. There's going to be changes to technology or regulations at the last minute, and there's going to be a need for results within a budget. That's why we as agencies especially are here. We are here to service and support and add value to our clients' businesses. And I think the more that we can set ourselves and our clients up for success with very collaborative, supportive ways of working and realistic deliverables that are designed to actually achieve clients' goals, not just the periphery of everything that's available, the less pressure we're ultimately applying to those people who are feeling the effects of it and are the ones who are having to create that performance and that result. And I think I've said it once, but there's more transparency in the industry than there has been previously, especially in terms of what actually goes into the fundamentals of campaign planning, management, buying. And going back to that want to provide clarity for clients, allowing that navigation of the complexities all supports greater understanding of the implications of a simple deadline move or a campaign replan that previously maybe would have felt simple on one side and would have felt like a huge pressuring demand to the person on the end. So hopefully there's the increase in communication, the increase in transparency and appreciation actually for what both sides of the coin are doing, are putting us in a position where we are on a lot more even keel in how we approach roles, jobs, responsibilities, and how we respect each other's time as well.
Yeah. And do you think working from home culture now has improved that, or done the opposite? And how are we juggling this? The work-life balance, whether you've got families and kids and other responsibilities. Popping out to the shops at lunch, to pick something up. How is that kind of has that culture made it easier? It'd be good to understand your take on that.
I mean, personally, I'm really grateful for the changes and approach to work over the last few years. I'm a parent of young children and I work in a global role. So to actually have the flexibility a couple of times a week to be able to do bedtime with my children and still be in the office for a late night call with the States, for example, is absolutely invaluable. I think in the throes of lockdown, especially at first, it's certainly difficult to separate being a parent and being at work. A closed office door is no major obstacle for a 2-year-old who wants some attention in any way, shape or form. And I think a lot of us actually became quite used to seeing small children, dogs, cats, etc., the postman, other halves, flatmates, as part of our lives. That said, in the office, you very rarely sit and have a one-to-one conversation in a box with nothing else going on around you. So it just became a slightly different version of events. I think that blurred line between the end of the working day was slightly dangerous for some people when we first went into working from home and needed to establish a new boundary, a new way of finishing work at the end of the day, creating that distance and moving on to our personal life. I know some people found that incredibly easy and some people found it very, very difficult and were still kind of attached to the laptop, or they'd stop and then sit down and watch some TV, but their laptop was there, so we'll do some emails. And I think it took a lot of time for some people to relax into actually, this is how I can distinguish my time. This is how I can make sure I'm still doing things for me. This is how I can take real advantage and actually feel like I'm more on top of work, whichever way it was. But I think there's certainly been shifts from a business perspective, moving away from presenteeism and being physically present in favor of performance. We were moving that way as an industry anyway, but it certainly accelerated that, which is positive. And especially if we think about the demands that are being made on people or the pressures that are being put on people, it gives an opportunity for people to work in a way that works for them. I think ultimately we're lucky because awareness and knowledge of mental health has been heavily advocated in conjunction with everything that's been happening in terms of a shift from being able to partly work from home. And there are pressures. There's pressures in every industry, all with them slightly different, nuanced, etc. But I think we're in a nice position at the moment where we have the tools for open, supportive conversation and the technology for flexible, personalised approaches to work. So there are pressures, but I hope that they're pressures that are allowing people to create their own kind of best practice and get the most out of both their personal lives and their careers at the same time.
Yeah, it's just that juggling act, really, isn't it? And like you said, some people, it took longer to separate work and kind of like shutting down and spending quality time with your family. And that's what, I'm the same as you, got two young kids. And, at the start, you were kind of constantly logged on your phone and you're sat with your children or they're having dinner and you have to physically tell yourself, what am I doing here? I can genuinely send this email either once they're asleep or in the morning, right? Nothing's going to happen from 7 to 9 o'clock or whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's that juggling act and making sure you're setting time aside. I think that's super important. What would you say excites you about our industry? We've talked a little bit about maybe not so much the negatives, but why it is complex. But what excites you about our industry looking into kind of the rest of this year and onwards?
And just for the record, I don't think the complexities are negative. I think they can be confusing. I think they can be limiting, and I think they can provide barriers to understanding. But I think the complexity that our industry holds is one of the most interesting things about it. And what excites me about our industry is the unknown, which part and parcel of that is the complexity.
Yeah.
And I think the ability to have conversations with someone and gain a totally new perspective, or hear about a new piece of technology or the next big thing when you're just not expecting it, but new little things come up all the time, a new take on something, a new way of doing something, a new application of a piece of technology that's previously been standard. It's so adaptable, it's so iterative, and ultimately the possibilities are endless. It is almost impossible for us to look into the future and determine where technology will be in X amount of time. Yes, there's, constructive predictions that we can make based on what we know people are working on and looking back in time. But to our point about kind of schools changing and, falling into advertising, our jobs didn't exist when we were growing up. So actually, what will the next kind of 20, 30 years hold? It's really interesting.
Definitely. We always finish off with this question in each of our episodes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So if you had a superpower in AdTech, what would it be?
Well, I think after our conversation today, instant comprehension. I think the ability to actually be able to instantly understand and work with any technology, programming language, tool, product, whatever it might be, anything new that's just popped itself up, would allow for absolutely limitless possibilities in terms of creating new, innovative, market-leading solutions to problems, as well as the ability to really adapt quickly, kind of being able to understand the connections and the interplays straight away and see around those corners that you're not quite sure about and work out where it sits in the frame of everything. Being able to have all that in one go would be a real superpower. So, yeah.
Amazing. I think that's all we've got time in today's episode. Thanks, Claire, for your time. It's been great speaking to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.